of given. I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight. We'll go ahead and stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item on the agenda is our public comment opportunity. We have one signed up to speak for a couple minutes. Mr. Myers?
Oh, won't take that long.
Okay.
First, thanks for allowing me to speak.
Thanks.
I hope you can hear me. I guess there's not going to be a lot of discussion today, but if you can use the mics, folks at home can hear you. Just want to reiterate, I reached out to a couple of board members, haven't had a chance to connect with them, talking about the master plan and the ultimate desire to build the new high school. And all I want to reiterate is that, as I mentioned, if you can assure the taxpayers the bottom line amount that you'll need for whatever that millage may result in for the big top and eventually down the line, the high school, to keep that number as low as possible, I hope people will listen and understand that it may be needed, but it has to be prioritized. All I can say is you can't have 50 priority ones. And if the new school and the big top are the top priorities, then, and I don't understand the funding issues, the facilities budget and all that. I know a lot of money goes through there for the parking lot at Pinkston and the roof at the, I guess Hackler. Those are large sums of money. And I know maintenance is part of your assigned task, maintain the schools and operate them. All I want to do is help you all in helping the public, the taxpayers, to support what you believe is a priority one. And I'll leave it at that. I hope to visit with a couple of the school board members at some point. Have gun will travel wherever I need to go. I'll be happy to visit with you. I know, and I just found out the other day, another member of the school board works. Tommy told me he's working. It's Medicare time and all that. I know Scott works. I know you, Jason, work. You've got a business, and so it sounds like, I know Brad's not here, but he runs a business, one I like very much, and have supported over the years. My dogs love the furniture. At any rate, all I'd like to say is I'd like to be part of the solution as opposed to anything else. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for sharing, Hap. Motion to approve the agenda.
Make a motion, we approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? All those in favor? It's unanimous. We'll move on to our board training session. Mr. Kevin, thanks for coming over.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Did everybody have a chance to sign the little?
Yes, sir. I'll pass
take
those to you.
Take that with me.
Yes, sir.
And for those that aren't here, Ms. Dewey, if they
Yes, sir.
want, we can set up a Zoom call so they can get the training.
And this is also being live streamed,
Okay.
so there will be a video that's available
Okay.
for folks to watch as well.
No pressure. Okay, thank you. Anyway, I appreciate you all taking the time to do this tonight. Do have a packet in front of you. I'll try to speak in the mic too. And so I'll just go through that. Probably will take about an hour, but certainly stop me if you have any questions. I want it to be pretty interactive with you all. So with that, let me skip a little bit around. If you want to, let's go to the second tab, which is really the training portion, if you will. We, in our offices, we call this really School Finance 101. And it's going to be basically where your funding comes from through the state. All of this will tie back to the third tab, the state aid notice. And so that's the final state aid notice for the 24-25 school year. Now, this document's going to be updated, so that's a little bit, that state aid notice is a little stale because the funding has changed slightly. But that's the final one, so that's what I included in your packet. If you want to go to DOE's website, you can find all the state aid notices. Just search by your district. There's preliminary ones put out several times a year. So with that, let me just start. If you'll flip on over to page 4, and you can see that pie chart there. And basically that's just to give you a sense of where the funding for school districts come from, where the funding comes from in the state of Arkansas for school districts. As you can see, most of it's going to come from your state and local. There's a small portion, 20% from federal and 9% other. You'll notice at the bottom, in particular, as you all know, if you accept federal funds, there's usually strings attached. So you can see there certain things. When you accept that federal dollars, they have to be spent on certain things. And you can see it has to be things like improving teacher quality, spent on at-risk children, child nutrition, Head Start, those sort of things. Okay. On page 5, the local funding, again, going to be almost the largest amount of the funding. So that's basically your local sources of funds, so your assessments really. One thing I want to point out at the top, in Arkansas, property is assessed at 20% of its market value. And you can see there just in that little bar chart there, if your property is valued at $100,000 and you're assessed at 20% of that, or $20,000, and you multiply that times 0.001, for that representative of 1 mil as a decimal. So that's $20 per $100,000. Your maintenance, there's three different types of millage classifications, if you will, in the state of Arkansas. Your M&O mills, you're required to have 25 M&O mills, which is oftentimes referred to as URT, or Uniform Rate of Tax. You all have slightly over that at 25.29 now. Again, you're going to have at least 25, a minimum, and once that's approved, the tax will continue to be levied each year unless voters authorize a change. So keep that in mind. Your debt service mills at 6.87, and that's just as it sounds. The revenue is used to pay debt service payments on your bonded indebtedness, and I'll go over that with you here in a little while, what you have outstanding. Dedicated M&O mills, you all don't have any of those. Very few districts in the state of Arkansas do, but if you do, you have to have the voters authorize it for a specific purpose. For instance, Russellville uses theirs for IT, information technology. So that's an option, but not a lot of districts do that. You can only have a maximum of 3 mills that you can ask voters to approve. But again, you don't have any of those, okay? At the bottom there, homestead tax credit, property tax relief. You probably know this, but eligible homeowners can receive up to $600 credit on their real estate bill. Essentially, you just, when you go down to the county assessor's office, you sign a piece of paper, and so you get that credit for that tax credit, that $600. That increased a little bit this year. Any questions on that before I move on? I'm going to kind of go quickly, so please stop me though if something doesn't make a lot of sense. Next category really is, again, the 37% that I showed you earlier in that pie chart. That's the state funding sources. That's where a majority of your funds come from. The biggest amount of funding comes from the foundation funding formula, and you can see that in the middle of the page. That's basically a set amount per ADM, or average daily membership, or your number of students. It's kind of a complicated calculation, and you can see it there under that third bullet. You take your district assessment times your 0.025, so that represents that uniform rate of tax, or that 25 M&O mills, times 0.98%, plus any miscellaneous fund, and you divide that by your prior year ADM. in the 24-25 school year, if you do that calculation, you come up with $3,797.39. You subtract that from 7,771, which was what it was last year. It's gone up here again. It'll tie back to the state aid notice. And that comes up to $25,2676. So that's basically what they're going to fund you per student. So you multiply that number, that $2,526.76, times your ADM, or that $3,797, and then you get to $9.59 million. Essentially, is what the district received in the 24-25 school year from foundation funding. That makes sense? I know it's kind of a weird. I don't know how they ever came up with that formula. Someone did. But anyway, that's how it's calculated. And again, as I say on the next page, it all ties back to that state aid notice. One thing to mention, in part of that formula, you see there that 98%. I want to point out that if you collect more than 98% of your 25 M&O mills, you're required to send that back to state. If you collect less than that, they're required to fund you up to 98%. Okay. You all are a little below 98%, I believe, so I think it's in here later, so that shouldn't be an issue. But we've had districts in the past, I believe it was Eureka Springs, it's been some time ago now, actually collected more than that 98%, and the state came looking for that money, and they had spent it. And the state sued the district, and the district won. So I don't know, it's been a long time ago now, it's probably been 15 years ago. But basically, Eureka's defense was, the money's gone, we've spent it, and I don't know what you want us to do, and the courts agreed with them. So I don't know. That's what it's supposed. That's the way it's supposed to happen. Okay. Other K through 12 state funding or categorical funding, alternative learning environment, or ALE. We're all actually are getting about almost $379,000 in this category. A little over 72 kids in that category. And it can only be used for eligible activities. As you can see, they're identified by the rules. It's student intervention programs, those sort of things. The funding, you can see, is $52.12, and then it's going to go up to $53.41 per child in that category next year. Okay. And the English language learner funding, that's $375 per student. Next year it's $366 now. You don't have a lot of kids in that category, only generating a little over $12,000 in that category. And then 26-27, you can see at the bottom, it's going to go up to $384. So all that was approved at the last legislative session, all these amounts. Okay. Our professional development funding, up to $41, and that's multiplied by the district's prior year 3/4 ADM membership. Again, those number of students, $142,402 to the district. Prior years were funded at $37.50. That's kind of a weird one. It's always had this maximum amount, but generally the state has never funded up to 41. I don't really know why, but that's the way it's worked in the past. So now your enhanced student achievement state categorical ESA, that's your school lunch. Used to be NSLA, National School Lunch. 3 different funding amounts, if you will. If you fall in less than 70%, you'll get funded at $551 per student. And if those districts are at 70 but no more than 90, it goes up to $1,103, and then over 90% is $1,653. You guys are actually in the lowest, as you might guess. So you're in that C, that $551 per student. So, but it's a sizable amount, $937,000 that the district received from the state from that funding. Again, these funds have to be used for specific programs and purposes. You can see at the bottom, literacy and or mathematics or science, specialists, coaches, highly qualified classroom teachers, tutors, teachers' aides, that sort of thing. But you have to use it for those things. Okay. Student growth funding, I know you all have had a little bit of declining enrollment, so you're obviously not going to get any funding there, but there it is for you, how that's calculated. Declining enrollment, you're getting a little bit there, 109,804. And it's equal to, you can see there in that second paragraph, the three-quarter ADM of the prior fiscal year subtracted from the average of the three-quarter year of the prior fiscal year. I won't go through all that, but you have had, and I'll touch on that here in a minute too, and you can see how those numbers have dropped just a little bit here for the district. Isolated funding, you won't qualify for that, or special needs funding, or special needs small district funding, nor will you qualify for that isolated transportation. You do get about $34,000 for enhanced transportation funding. Ms. Duke, I don't know that I know how you get classified there. Do you know?
It's a secret.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's what they say, it's a secret.
I'm not
Don't
sure.
spend it on transportation.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 rules.
So, and then finally on that, finally on that page, bonded debt assistance. That's being phased out. You all don't get any of that anyway. But years ago, the state used to, when you issued debt, the state actually paid a portion of your payments. That was phased out, I believe, in I think it was around 2010. And the reasoning for that was the state was participating in, it was kind of Northwest Arkansas, which is where I am. I think it was Bentonville had built a fairly sizable football stadium, and the state was helping pay for that. And there were some state leaders that thought that wasn't the way their funds ought to be spent. So we started phasing that out, and that was to try to ease the pain of phasing that out through this bonded debt assistance. Y'all don't have that, so it doesn't matter, but that's where it came from. Now, your salary equalization fund, Act 680 of 2021, sizable amount of funding there, $713,643, and which y'all are familiar with all that in the LEARNS Act. You're collecting about $1,520,000 there. We don't get any documentation about how that's calculated. I don't get it. Maybe the district does. It's not part of the state aid notice, so how they come up with that, I don't know, but it's a sizable amount of money there for the district probably each year. And on page 12, obviously on your fund balances, if that net legal balance exceeds 20%, you need to send that usually to a building fund, so you don't carry that. The Academic Facilities Partnership Program, that is something you all probably talked about in the past. If you apply to the state for funding and you get approved, there's another calculation where they come up with the wealth index, and then if your project's approved, the state will participate in funding that project. So the latest we have is the state, for your district, if you apply for a project, you're approved for the project, you would have to cover 60.2% of it, and the state would cover 39.8%. Now, keep in mind, that doesn't mean you're going to get full funding either. When that program started, there was a lot more money in it than there is now, and so they will only fund it up to a certain amount, and it's usually based on a square footage number and whatever they come up with. And of course, a lot of my districts that have been approved for these things will comment, they can't build the building for what they're being funded at, at least on a per square foot basis. But the state sets that, and if you get approved, then they're going to participate at those levels. So even though it's probably not going to be what you would like it to be. So, and then I won't read this necessarily, but that high growth district loan program. Obviously, you're not eligible for that. You're not growing at that kind of rate, but that's is a funding mechanism from the state. The next section is really, and I know we're not talking about this in your district, but this is just kind of part of our presentation, so it's included here. This is just types of debt financing. Non-bonded debt is really short-term debt, so it's something that's going to be paid within 10 years typically. Usually bonded debt is going to be 25, 30, 35 years. heard you all mention the new high school. If that's something you look at in the future, it's probably going to be, a 30 or 35-year financing. But non-bonded debt, usually 10 years. Several examples of those would be post-dated warrants. We don't do those much anymore, but basically those are post-dated checks. I've worked with some of the smaller districts. Usually it's something less than $1 million where we would negotiate with the bank and set an interest rate, and then the district would basically write out 10 checks, and they would, at closing, hand it over to the bank, and each year the bank would just cash that check. So it's just what it sounds like, a post-dated check. Installment contracts, lease purchase agreements, oftentimes you would buy buses, those sort of things with a lease purchase. Revolving loans is actually through the state. That is the same interest rate at 4.95 since I started at Stevens 21 years ago. It's never changed. You can typically always, I usually advise my districts, if you need to borrow some money, we can always do much better than 4.95. But that's a program that you can borrow through the state. And again, not again, but on page 15 at the top, some of those short-term loans, as I mentioned, schools, you would purchase buses, and then, renovations of school facilities, new buildings, that sort of thing. Now, I mentioned bonded debt. 3 different kinds of bonded debt. A voted bond issue, of course, you'll remember in 22 and 23, I guess it was, when you asked the voters for millage increase, that would be considered a voted bond issue. There's only 2 laws changed several times, but there's only 2 shots really anymore at if you went to your voters and asked for some sort of project and millage or extension or increase or whatever it might be. It's really only March and November now. It used to be you could there were several chances to do special elections, but that's all been changed. So you only have two shots at it now. And next year it's March 6th, I think it is. And Ms. Cotter, I think, in fact, already has the proposed budget that we've sent, so for you all to get all that together. A second lien bond issue is considered bonded debt, but that is something that voter approval is not required, whereas the one I just described, the voted, obviously is. One of the caveats with second lien bond issues is you can only go out as far as your voted issue, so what's already been authorized by the voters. And how you pay for those is the debt service mills. I mentioned your 6.87. As that that so-called surplus that you're not using for debt service on your bond issue, you can use that to make payments on a second lien bond issue. Think of it more like a second mortgage on a house, essentially. So that's an option that you could issue some debt with. And then again, non-voted refunding bond issue. Several years ago, and I'll show you this in a minute, we did a refunding for the district where the district saved money because the interest rate dropped. And so you don't have to ask voters to authorize that because you're not extending the term. All you're doing is changing the interest rate. Okay, so that's what's called, in my world, refunding. It's just like if you refinance a house, though, same kind of principle. I won't necessarily read these to you, but there are a couple of things to consider when you're refunding outstanding debt is to evaluate optional call date. When you do restructure or refund a bond issue, you're going to have a new call date, meaning, and typically in Arkansas, they're going to be 5 years. We do them shorter than that, but usually there needs to be, and in my mind, there needs to be a reason to do it shorter. But usually that's 5 years, and that's typically a lockout period. So if you did a bond issue this year, you would typically, and the call date would be 2030. I mean, you can't do anything else with it until that time. Now, there's some exceptions to that, like restructuring it on a taxable basis, meaning that the bonds would now be taxable rather than tax exempt, which would be normal for a school district. So you can do it taxable, but that's going to be a higher interest rate. So typically, you need to keep in mind if you restructure something that you're not going to be able to do anything makes sense. So, and I mentioned refunding for savings. And sometimes you can restructure existing debt. Again, back to this voted issue, you might restructure your existing debt, roll it into a new bond issue, ask the voters to authorize this restructuring of your existing debt because you're going to generate construction funds by doing that. The one thing to keep in mind when you restructure debt, particularly if you do it and you push it out, the maturity out to generate funds, is you're going to pay interest on interest you've already paid. So that's one thing to always kind of keep in mind. It'd be the same thing like if you, again, borrowed money on a house and you paid on it for 20 years, and then you went back to the bank and borrowed money against that house and pushed it out 30 years. You paid interest for 20 years, and now you're going to pay interest again. Now, sometimes it makes sense. It just depends on what the situation is, but that's just something you need to always kind of keep in mind, and that's something that we would communicate to you all if we ever got to that point. Next page is post-issuance compliance. This is something that is part of our contract with the district. We help the district with. This is basically when you borrow money, and I mentioned tax-exempt bonds. When you borrow money on a tax-exempt basis, meaning if someone purchases your bonds, they get interest paid twice a year on a semi-annual basis. That interest is tax-exempt from federal taxes. If you live in the state of Arkansas, it's tax-exempt from state taxes as well. So as a result, you get lower interest rates by doing that. But because you do that, the Internal Revenue Service requires certain things of you. And basically, it's to ensure that bondholders or people that own those bonds can look at your financial situation. There's a website called EMA, which stands for Electronic Municipal Market Access. We'll do an annual report for you, and I'll show you one in a minute. And we file that for you every year to comply with those continued disclosure requirements. Let's see if there's anything I'm missing there. I want to mention the responsible person at the very bottom. So there would have been a post-issuance compliance manual that would have been adopted by the board several years ago, and it's basically just a guide, if you will, of what the district is required to do. The responsible person is typically always going to be the district treasurer, and that person is the official record keeper for the district. One of the things that we always stress when we do a bond issue is the district's required to keep all documentation of their bonds. So, and basically you have to keep it forever, which is kind of seems crazy, but you essentially do. But you have to keep it for the life of the bond issue plus 3 years. Excuse me. So a long time, longer than I'm going to be here, and I hope everybody else, quite honestly. And then finally on page 17, the School District Enhancement Program, or Intercept Program. One of the things, in fact, our firm, Stevens, worked with the legislature back in 2013 to get this adopted, but the district is required to make their bond payments no later, you can see it in the second paragraph, no later than 15 days before the date is due. If you do not, the state will intercept funds that are going to come to the district to make those payments on the district's behalf, and then they will come back to the district to try to recover those funds. That's never happened since I've been here, but that's the rule. And as a part of that enhancement program, or intercept program rather, Moody's has assigned a AA2 rating. You can see that at the bottom, basically to any school in the state of Arkansas, regardless of what their financial situation is, because of this intercept program. Okay. And I mentioned continued disclosure, and I jumped around a little bit, but you can see Emma there on that second paragraph, electronic municipal market access. Just some basic stuff, and this is just our kind of our standard, so I kept it in here. School bond examples. You can see, and I mentioned this a little bit a while ago, but ask voters for additional debt service mills, or debt service millage, and just some examples. I won't necessarily go through those unless you'd like me to, but just in this example, you can see quickly a $50 million assessed value, 20-year bond issue at 3% interest rate, and you can see what one new mill generates, revenue of $50,000, so that supports a $745,000 bond issue, and so on. And again, I remind you that in Arkansas, your assessed value is 20% of the value of your property. Okay, so that's how we get to that $50,000 there. And I mentioned restructuring, and again, you know, you might use an existing bond issue, roll that into a new bond issue, and push it out and generate funds. That's basically that option 2. And option 3, that was just a restructure. And option 3 is just what I described, that additional debt service mills and restructure existing debt. And when we looked at your stuff before, we didn't do that. It was just new millage. So there's some, I'm not going to go through these, but the next few pages are just some debt financing terms. Maybe just a good reference if you're just so inclined to go look at this stuff. It's just so interesting. I know. But, sort of those sort of things. Why don't I go back to under tab 1, and I mentioned the filings that we do for the district, the disclosure filings. This is really, I'm showing financial analysis on the front cover, but it's really the annual report that you're required to file every year, and again, we do this for you. But really, it starts out with your assessment history, and you can kind of see there, you had some pretty nice growth the last several years. We're averaging there a little over 5%. A little more than that at 5.26% from 23 to 24. So, you know, not great, big, huge growth, but pretty nice, steady growth. And I mentioned your millage structure on the next page. 25.29 M&O mills, or maintenance and operation mills, and then again your 6.87 debt service mills. So your total there is 32.16. You can see there the average millage rate for school districts in Arkansas is 39.25, so you're obviously quite a bit below that. You know, for what it's worth, that's the average. And again, some of this is redundant, but one mill is 1/10 of 1%. You can see the assessed values times 0.001. And again, that 20%, 100,000 times now becomes 20,000 times 0.001, so that's $20 in this example. And you can see here, one mill produces about $808,000 in Mountain Home, and that's basically just your assessment at 95% collection, which is about where you all are. And then finally there at the bottom, it's just a millage comparison with similar enrollment. And, you know, again, we're not necessarily trying to compare your area, but really enrollment, and you can kind of see where you fall. I guess every district, at least in that chart, is higher millage than you guys collect. Okay. And then the next one is comparisons with similar assessments. And you can see how you fall there. And then finally, similar millage at the bottom. And so Heber Springs, Cotter, obviously close by, Bergman close by, all those are pretty close to where what you're collecting. Any questions on any of that? So average daily membership I mentioned earlier, and you can see here since 2021 where you are. That line chart is a little misleading just because of the scale, but you have dropped a little bit here in your enrollment. You can see where you stand today at 3735 versus 3841 back in 2021. And then enrollment by grade, of course we got this from ADE, it's asterisk there, so I assume that it's probably as up to date as we have. But you can see how you fall. It's pretty even for you all. I guess high school, 9th through 12th would be probably the largest group of kids, but pretty even overall by grade. And then the sources, uses of the fund. I look at this from Leah and the district and put this together for you, and you can see what your fund balances look like. Pretty steady there, over $7 million each year. And then finally, your two outstanding bonded debts there. In 2000, that's a 2011 qualified school construction bond. That actually will pay off here pretty soon in 2027. Those are really just short-term debt. All that came out of American Recovery Reinvestment Act 2009. If you'll recall, we had a pretty deep recession through there. And this was just to help stimulate some funding for districts through the federal government. The federal government is actually helping pay your interest on this bond issue. A lot of districts did these because you could borrow this money, and with the help from the federal government, oftentimes you pay it into a sinking fund like this one, and that sinking fund is generating interest as you pay into it, and oftentimes you would pay less than you actually borrowed at the end of the day. So that's the reason districts did them. There were some strings, of course, because again, it's federal government, but it was a good way to borrow some money, and so the district did that. Now, 2018 is your commercial bond issue, 37.57, and you can see I mentioned refundings earlier. We actually refunded your 2013 bonds, so that would have been, I mentioned that call date. So in 2018, we would have hit that 5-year call date, so we were able to restructure the debt and generate about $2.76 million in savings to the district. Again, it's just like you would refinance a house. You just take advantage of lower interest rates, so your payment is less. And when you add all that up, it was over $2.7 million in savings to the district. And you have one lease purchase there. It was done in 2024 for $250,000, a little more than that. And then I'm jumping, forgive me, around a little bit, but your balance is there. You can see to the right. So your total outstanding debt of $30,182,274, and then finally at the bottom, your total debt to assessment is 3.55%. That's, I didn't go back and double check this, but that's probably lower than any district that I've worked with. So that's really low. So that's, you all have done a nice job managing debt. You can see on the next page, that's what we call a coverage chart. So we take your total assessment times your debt service mills, and again, those are the mills that are dedicated to paying your debt service. So you can see the debt service working from left to right is around 2.8 each year, and you're generating about 5.5 in revenues, and so we're dividing those two to get a coverage of 1.98. So that means 1.98 times more revenue than debt service. And then on your far right is the so-called surplus. Now, every district in the state is using that surplus to fund operations. That's just, there's not enough money elsewhere to not do that. So just so you know, every district is using that money somewhere. You heard me mention earlier second lien debt. That so-called surplus to the right is what you use to issue debt and make payments on a second lien bond issue if you so chose. Now again, I always caution my districts, you may have the capacity to do a second lien bond issue, but you're probably using that money somewhere else. So you always got to, just like in your own finances, do you have enough, can you afford that payment is what it really gets down to if you issue second lien debt. Okay. And then at the bottom is just the growth in a chart showing the growth in debt service mills. And you can see 80,000 back in 2020 growth up to about 277,000 this last year. Okay. And I mentioned your tax collections, and we would have gotten this from the district, but you can see you're around 95, 96%. I didn't do the average is down there, 96.95. So you're a little more than 95, but you're not quite at that 98 number that we talked about.
Are you seeing other districts, that collection go down? We've been a little disappointed to see that.
I don't remember off the top of my head. I think my districts in Northwest Arkansas are probably doing a little better than that, but that may, they're growing so fast too, though. So I don't know that's a really good comparison. But some of the smaller districts kind of have some of this issue that you're seeing, I think. Okay. Let's see here. Any questions on any of that before I jump around? On tab 3, there's that state aid notice. And again, you can go to DOE's website and find all of these, but this will basically tell you the story. That training portion shows you how a lot of that's collected, or how much you're allotted per child. But if you just follow this state aid notice, that'll basically tell you what the district's going to get funded every year. You know, if you look to the top right-hand side, you'll see that initial per student foundation amount. That's $7,771. You may have mentioned that earlier. And they basically do that calculation and come up with, you know, $5,244 per student you generate, and so they subtract the 2, and then you get that $2,526.76, and you multiply that by your ADM number back to the left, and then down below, and I know I'm jumping around, on number 28, you can see that $9,595,000 amount that you received from the state, and then the rest, everything else just follows what I was talking about earlier. And it should show you, and it does, how much they fund per category. If you look at number 37, professional development, again, that's the weird one where they say they're going to fund up to 41, but they only fund you $37.50. I don't really know why they do that, but that's the way it works. Okay. Any questions on that? The next tab under number 4, this is something we do for the district every year too. We are basically taking the state aid notice as a preliminary and projecting the amount of revenue that the district is going to receive. And so we work from the state aid notices, and then use this spreadsheet and come up with at the very bottom, it looks like, based on our calculations, the district's going to receive about $1.4 million in the 25-26 year versus last year. Okay, we always qualify that. Please check our math, because don't necessarily rely on this, but this is based on your preliminary state aid notices, what you should collect. Questions on that? Okay. And then finally, just for your information, and I mentioned that in my website, again, if you Google EMMA MSRB, you can find that website, and you can search for Mountain Home and find all your outstanding debt. But I've included here an official statement so you can kind of see what that looks like. So when we did that in 2018, we produce a preliminary official statement that goes out to bidders. And if you're not familiar with that process, we put together a preliminary official statement anytime you issue debt. That's submitted to investors at least a week ahead of time, and then we have a bid, just like you might bid a truck. And we get interested parties bid an interest rate, and once we get those final bids, I work with my analyst in Little Rock. We come up with the final par amount of the bond issue, which is the principal amount. You can see at the top, $30,570,000. Fill in all the interest rates, and then this final, so-called final official statement is submitted. It basically gives a potential investor everything they need to know about the district. You can see on page 8, it starts with a description of the school district, and it'll show at that time who the school board was. Shows Dr. Long obviously was the superintendent at that time. It'll have information like on the next page, the different schools in the district, and then your enrollment after that. Assessment history, all those sort of things that a potential investor might want to know is included in this document. But you can find all this information, and on the next page, page 11, is your outstanding. information for the districts included as well. That's really kind of what I had, unless y'all have questions. I know that's just super interesting, but. Let's do, is there anything I left out or didn't cover, or?
I think it's nice to have our own numbers when we're looking at, with the training. It's really nice.
Okay.
So that state aid notice was that the final state aid?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that was
Yep.
the final for
That was
last
the
year.
final one from, right. I will, Ms. Dewey, I'll send this to, School Board Association, a copy of this.
Okay,
And copy you, so that they know the training was done, and that, you know, the district gets their CE hours. And again, I'm happy to, if Mr. Knight and Mr. Butler want,
okay,
I can go over it with them, and
be great,
we can include them later, if that works.
great, thank you.
You bet.
Mr. Kevin, thank you.
Yes,
This
sir.
was really good information.
Well, I
so.
hope, it's not, you know, really riveting stuff, but maybe it's a good reference for you.
Sure.
I mean, it's always kind of a good exercise for me to go back through this every year when I look at them, so. Happy to do this every year if it helped for you all, if you just let me know and come back, so.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Nothing else?
Appreciate it.
That was easy.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And my contact information is on that, financial analysis section. Email, phone number, all that stuff is there. If y'all have questions later, something comes up and you wanna talk about it, sure, holler at me. I'll visit with you.
Do you have a digital version of this?
I can send you one.
Because we could attach that right to the website.
If you
to
could,
the-
Yep.
send me the one,
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be
Yes,
great.
ma'am, I'll do that.
and I can
I'll
get
it
that
to
done
you.
tomorrow.
Get it to you hopefully tomorrow morning then.
Perfect.
Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Have a safe drive back.
Yeah, thank you.
And watch out for the deer.
Oh, I know. It's that time of year, isn't it?
Yes, it's always that time of year.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Kevin.
you.
Not with me.
Drive safe.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is going to executive session for personnel resignations. So we'll take a short break and then we'll go.
Thank you. When I get the digital, I'll make you a copy.
I just thought